Hello everyone, my name is David Swindler with Action Photo Tours. In today's tutorial, we're going to cover how to combine focus stacked images in Photoshop to achieve a very good blend of depth of field from nearest foreground clear into the background. And this is a question we often get asked on our tours, is how do I create that sharp effect from nearest foreground all the way into the distant background. Especially when you're close to a foreground element, it's very hard to make everything sharp. Well, that's where focus stacking comes into play. And what we do is we take a series of images. The first one is focused at our nearest foreground, and then we make small steps in our focus ring until we get to our known infinity point where we know the background will be sharp. Now we know that our sky is going to be in best focus at a very final image because I only rotated that focus ring until I got to my known infinity point. And indeed, if I zoom in here on this infinity focused image, you can see it's nice and sharp back here, great detail on the clouds. But if I come up here to my foreground, you can see that it's very blurry. And that's why we needed to employ the focus stacking technique. So now we have to go and load all these images into Photoshop so that we can stack them together. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key and do a continuous selection of all of these. You're going to right click or do two-finger click on a Mac. Come up here to Edit In. Go down to the bottom here where it says Open as Layers in Photoshop. And that's the one we're going to select. So it's going to take a little bit of time here for it to load in all these high resolution images. So we'll just give it a couple minutes here and hang out until that is complete. All right, so all these images have loaded into our layers palette in Photoshop, beginning with the first one that we know is focused for the nearest foreground and the final one that we know that was focused for the background. So each time that I move that focus ring, it would cause a micro shift in focal length. And so that has the effect of essentially zooming in as I keep changing that focus more towards infinity. That's why when you do a focus stack, you have to make sure you have a little extra space around the edges because you're going to have to crop at the end. And how much you have to crop will depend on how extensive your focus stack is. Now, because our focal length is changing, we're going to have to align all these images first before they're even going to line up with each other. And so I'm going to hold the Shift key. I'm going to come down and select all my layers. Next, I'm going to come up here to Edit. And I'm going to say Auto Align Layers. I'm going to leave the projection on Auto. And then I don't like to select any of these options down below for lens correction. Then I click OK. So now it's going to automatically line up all these images. And then we'll be able to see how much image area we're going to lose. Now the next question that we have to address is when do I crop? Do I want to crop after we do the image alignment? Or do we want to crop after we've done the focus blend? And I've done it both ways. And I will tell you that cropping before we do the focus blend will produce the best results and you'll have the least amount of artifacts to deal with. Now there will be times where you won't want to crop some of these areas out of your nearest foreground. And if that's the case, then you will have to crop afterwards, just knowing that it's going to require quite a bit more manual cleanup, especially around the edges. All right, so it just finished. Now if you look around, you can see like these little white borders that have appeared around the edges of the image. Up here on the top, over here on the side. And that's just the algorithm realigning these images, to account for the micro changes in focal length and also any micro shifts that may have happened with the camera and or tripod while I was fiddling with it. I find that even with the most bomber tripod and ball head, if I'm fiddling with something in between shots, there's almost always a small little micro shift that I want to get aligned before I try to combine different images. And that's especially true if you're shooting a high resolution camera. So what I'm going to do next is I want to look at only the infinity focused image. To do so, I'm going to hold the Alt key on a PC or the Option key on a Mac and click on this eyeball right here. And you can see that the infinity focused image, like I was telling you before, it has the effect of zooming in as I change that focus ring. And you can see this is how much of the image area that we are going to lose. So to make our job simple, we're going to crop according to this final focused image. So I'm going to come over to my crop tool, which is right here. And then I'm going to come over to my crop tool options, and I'm going to select original ratio. I like to keep the ratios consistent so I don't end up with a hodgepodge of different aspect ratios. And this is important, especially if some of your images are going out for print. And so I'm just going to come up from each corner and drag down till I see it match the image area. The same over here. Then I double click in the center to commit to the crop. Now I'm going to come over here and hold the Alt or Option keys and turn all the other layers back on by clicking on that same eyeball. Next, we are going to create a copy of all these layers. And this is important to do because if we don't make a copy of these, it's harder to get the layers back afterwards if we need to make do some manual cleanup. And it's far easier just to have them here and available in our stack without any layer masks getting in the way. So the keyboard command to copy all these layers is Command or Control J. So after hitting Command or Control J, now I have copies of all of these that are in the active selection, and then these guys are just hanging out in case I need them later on. Next, we go up to Edit, and we choose Auto Blend Layers. And we're not doing a panorama, but we want it to stack images. So we make sure that that one is selected, and then we also select the seamless tones and colors. So we're just going to go ahead and hit OK and let the algorithm complete its task. Now what this is going to do is it's going to create layer masks on each one of these layers to selectively reveal the sharpest portion of each layer. All right, so these little black and white icons that you see over here, these are the layer masks that is assigned to each one of our layers. And the way layer masks work is that white will reveal that portion of this layer, and then black will conceal a given portion of that layer. So if I hold the Alt or Option key, I can actually see what the layer mask looks like by clicking on it. And you can see here that the algorithm mistakenly thought that the sky should be taken from our foreground focused image. We obviously know that it has to be taken from our infinity focused image, so that's something that we're going to fix as we go through the process. And you can see here that this area here that's in white, this is where it was finding areas that were real sharp that it thought needed to be part of the final output. Now as we go through the layer masks, gradually those white areas start moving up higher and higher. And this is because we're changing the focal length in the focus ring. So now we're going to have to go through and do some manual cleanup. The first thing I like to do is I like to zoom in on my image and just kind of scan around, especially the edges, and make sure that there aren't any artifacts. And the easy way to zoom in Photoshop is Command or Control plus, and to zoom out is Command or Control minus. So we'll do Command plus here, and we'll come in to 100%. You can see where it says 100% down here. And then I'm going to hold the space bar to bring up my hand tool. And that allows me to click and drag so I can navigate around my image very quickly. So I can come around and start looking at my edge and see if there's any artifacts that I need to be aware of. And you can see here that this corner looks a little bit soft. And most likely that is going to be just lens corner softness. But what I do notice is that there are a few little areas in here where it didn't grab all from this near focused image. I could get a little bit sharper result if I told it to manually blend some of these areas in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this image to the top of my layer stack. And then I'm going to add a layer mask, but this time I want a black layer mask because I only want to reveal just the small portions of this layer that I choose to reveal. If I click on the Add Layer Mask option while the Alt or the Option key is pressed, then it will automatically add a black layer mask. Next, I'm going to come up to my brush tool, B key on the keyboard, and I'm going to make sure I'm at 100% opacity. I'm going to make sure that my brush size is very soft because I don't want to see any brush strokes. And then I'm going to use my left and right bracket keys to toggle my brush size to get it where I want it. In this case, I'm going to do kind of a larger brush size. I'm going to kind of just paint through here because I know all of this needs to be taken from my closest focused image. You can see there it's starting to improve a little bit of that sharpness of the nearest foreground here. I'm just going to come along and do that all throughout here. You can see that that really improved the edge sharpness over here. It was grabbing that area from a different image that wasn't as ideal. And you can see if I paint along here, see how that also makes it a bit sharper. So yeah, that's a good change. And the beauty of layer masks is if I paint somewhere and I don't like what I did, then I can easily just switch to black paint, and then I can just undo everything as far as I need. But in this case, that was a good change. So I'm going to move it back to white and just redo that all throughout here. So the algorithm is good in Photoshop, but it's not perfect, which is why you almost always will have to do some level of manual cleanup like this. Then the next thing I'll do is I'll just come up to the rest of my edge, make sure that there's no other artifacts that don't look good. Then I'll come through and look through the middle of the image and so forth. Now the next thing we know we have to clean up is the sky. And so I'm going to drag this last image that I took and bring this one now to the very top of my layers stack. You can see now the mountains are sharp again. And so I'm going to do the same thing where I put in a black layer mask by holding the Alt or the Option key. And now I'm going to do Command or Control 0 to show me the full-sized image. Next, I'm going to use my right bracket key to increase the brush size. I'm going to make sure that I'm on white paint over here. Now I'm just going to paint in where I know it should be for the infinity focused image. And there we go. And I know everything back in here is going to be focused at infinity. So now we can zoom in, take a look at that. And everything's looking really good now. The sky is nice and sharp, and we're also tack sharp all the way up into our nearest foreground. So at this point, I really want to make sure that I'm completely satisfied with this image. If I'm not, then I want to make sure I clean up everything I can find before I get rid of all my layers. Now, if I were to save the file with all these layers in place, the file size would be gigantic. And so I only save with the layers in place if I'm not completely done and I know I need to go back and work on it. In this case, I'm pretty confident everything looks good. So I'm just going to come up here to Layer, and we're going to choose Flatten Image. You can see now it created just a single layer image that's called Background. So I'm going to do Command or Control 0. A couple other things that I want to do in Photoshop before we leave is I just want to clean up a little bit around the edge. I find that when there's distracting elements on the edge, it tends to draw people's eye away from the main subject of the photo, which is this V-shaped crack. And so there's a couple ways we can deal with removing that. What we'll do is come up to Layer, and we are going to duplicate the layer. Now we're going to come up to Edit, and we are going to do a transform. And the transform option we're going to choose is a free warp. Then I'm going to click right here, and I'm just going to ever so slightly drag this area just right out of the frame. Now I can do the same for this little crack over here, but you have to be careful. If you start stretching things too far, you'll start noticing obvious distortion. So, I might just want to do it only like about halfway. When I'm done, I hit the Enter key to lock in the transform. And now I still have a little bit of that curve on the right to get rid of. The first thing I'm going to try is some content-aware fill. So I'm going to grab my lasso tool. I'm going to come over here and drag around this guy. And then I'm going to right-click on a PC or do the double finger click on a Mac, bring up this menu, and choose Fill. Now, if it doesn't show content aware here in the contents, you're going to want to come down and make sure that's selected. And then also choose Color Adaptation. And we're going to click on OK. Now you can see it cleaned up a good amount of this for the most part, but it kind of created a few more edge artifacts. So I'm going to get rid of these marching ants by doing Command or Control D for deselect. And I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to grab this guy and do the same thing, fill, content aware. You can see that the offending area gets smaller and smaller with each pass. Come over here and do the same on this. Fill, content aware. It just gets a little bit smaller. Now, an easy way that I can clean this area up is to use the clone stamp tool. I'm going to come over here, select clone stamp, make sure that mode is on normal, opacity is at 100%, and also make sure that your hardness is at 0 because we want to use soft brushes here. Then I'm going to get my brush size to where I want it. And then before you can use the clone stamp tool, you have to sample from a given area. And you sample by holding down the Alt key and then clicking. And so I'm going to sample from right in here. So I'm going to hold the Alt key, click right there. And I'm just going to kind of paint in that texture right over that offending edge area. I can do the same over here. I can sample like over this crack. And there we go. We were able to clean up those artifacts. You can see the before and after. At this point, I can go ahead and save this. And when I hit save, it's going to create a TIFF or a PSD image that will be automatically reloaded to your Lightroom catalog. So we'll go ahead and hit save. And so it created a new TIFF file now that will automatically become loaded in our Lightroom catalog. So now I can come into Lightroom again and continue making any kind of adjustments I want before I decide to do my final export of the image. So anyways, I hope this helps you understand a little bit better about the focus stacking procedure that I like to use in Photoshop. But do be aware, if you have moving elements in your scene, especially in your landscape, things like leaves blowing or wildflowers moving in the wind, then focus stacking will not work well. And if you're trying to photograph conditions like those and your depth of field limited, then I would recommend getting a tilt shift lens where you can actually tilt the focal plane forward to augment your depth of field. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. If you're not already a member of our loyalty program, we highly encourage you to join, as our loyalty members get free access to our videos as we release them, and they also get the first access to these videos. Anyways, until next time, bye.